Welcome back to the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Coates. Join me along with industry leaders and friends on a quest to get more people through the gym door and eating and living healthier. Join me where evidence meets empathy while rejecting fitness industry fads and extremism. Let's begin. Dr. Trevor Kouritzin. This is quite an academic background you got. Bachelor of Chemical Engineering, Master's in Human Nutrition, Doctorate in Medicine. And you are the formulator for All Max Nutrition. That's a brand I've liked for a really long time. It's great to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. It's actually a kind of funny story how I got the invitation. It was in Columbus, of all places.
So I was going to tell this story. So I am at the Arnold Classic and walk around the festival. I see you there and I recognize you because you go to the same Good Life gym in Edmonton, Alberta that I do. And I'd seen you around the gym and you're a fit guy and you just recognize regular members. We never interacted. So I said, hi, we get to chatting a little bit. Turns out, yeah, you actually work for Allmax, which I didn't realize. And given your academic background, you're actually a perfect person to talk about some of the stuff we're going to get into. And I think one of the coolest places to start would be, is there a problem with quality across the supplement industry?
Like questions like that, like it's such a loaded question.
Mhm.
Wherever there's humans, there's going to be people who are going to break the rules. That's just the reality of it, right? I think for the most part, quality in supplements is pretty regulated, but that's really why you want to pick reputable brands because a new brand that has no reputation, they have nothing to lose if they don't play by the rules.
Mm.
We can get into some of like the regulations and testing protocols and things like that, but there's quite a bit of regulations in terms of dietary supplements, particularly in Canada. But the smaller brands, they don't really have a reputation to lose. They don't really care, right?
So, yeah, what is the difference between the major regulations with Canada and the US? Because there are certain supplements that I remember, even when we'll talk about Jack 3D later. I remember we could
Yeah.
get Jack 3D. There was definitely some stuff that you couldn't get in Canada that you can in the US. And even with like caffeine content energy drinks, I remember
Mhm.
when I was at the Arnold and I grabbed a Monster Rain, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, these things have 300 milligrams of caffeine down here. They're tops at 180 in Canada.
So Canada is very proactive with their regulations, where America is very retroactive. So how Canada works is if I make a formula, I have to submit it to Health Canada for approval. And once you get approval, you get an NPN number, and then you can actually make your product. So until you get the NPN number, you cannot manufacture your product. And
Hmm.
it's a very slow process. Once you submit the NPN application, it takes about 12 months. So it's pretty brutal, right? Because you'll have everything done, but you can't actually sell it until you get that NPN number. But the nice thing of that is then Health Canada does all their checks in terms of safety, dosages, amounts, things like that. And they're extremely anal. Like with caffeine, it's not just the dosage, but the amount of dosages you're recommending throughout the day, the intended demographic, even the product name. They're very, very anal. So
Hmm.
for me, it's a pain in the butt. For the customer, it's a good thing because they're doing all of their regulatory and health checks, and they're also approving or denying claims.
Hmm.
So if I wanted to say a claim, makes you build 20 pounds of muscle in a week or something, they would say we need at least two studies to validate that claim in the exact dosage in the product. So they're checking everything. They're checking ingredients, they're checking claims, they're checking names, they're checking directions. In America, you can do whatever you want until the FDA gets enough complaints, and then they'll come after you.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
the FDA has the same rules in Canada, but they don't come after you until there's a problem. Part of the reason for that is they want to build up a lot of evidence, so when they come after you, they can sue you for tons and tons of money. And they can also confiscate your facility, your equipment, and everything like that. So Canada doesn't really make this as much of like a money-making exercise. It's regulatory. It's kind of just, that's how it is. But in America, they don't actually really care if you play off size because they can seize your building, they can seize your assets, they can seize everything. So it's very, very different. The rules are actually very similar, but America doesn't enforce them until they actually get enough consumer complaints or class action lawsuits or things like that.
I'll interrupt this episode for a quick but important side quest. While I don't think everybody needs to track nutrition all the time, tracking is one of the most powerful tools to make sure you're not eating too much or too little. And MacrosFirst is my go-to app
For me and my clients, MacrosFirst has a free barcode scanner, and a premium version comes with a bunch of cool stuff to make managing your nutrition easier. Like, one, AI search. AI is everywhere now, where you can speak or type the foods you wish to save and log everything without having to search for each individual ingredient. Two, import recipes from a website. Save time creating recipes manually by importing all ingredients and instructions from your favorite recipe websites. No more searching for each ingredient one by one, just paste in the website. And three, this one's a big one for nutrition coaches. Follow unlimited friends so you can follow all your clients. And there's a lot more cool features. You can try the premium version of MacrosFirst free for 14 days. Just download MacrosFirst from the App Store. And during setup, you'll be asked, how did you hear about us? Type in the code Andrew.
So there are disincentives on the American side. It's just that they play out a different timeline. What about the certifying bodies? What is it? NSF for sport. I think there's another major one. I'm not super well informed on this. So what does that stuff mean?
NSF, Informed Choice, True Shield, they're all third-party testing for WADA analytes, basically.
Okay.
So when you make a product through Health Canada, you have to do a lot of tests. You have to test for product yield, product impurities, but the product impurities you're testing for are lead, arsenic, bacteria, microbes, pesticides, things like that. You're not testing for steroids, SARMs, peptides, or whatever like that. So basically, how they're all a little bit different, but essentially what they do is when you make a product, let's say you make 10,000 bottles, one bottle gets shipped to their facility and they test it. And they test for steroids, SARMs, growth hormones, stimulants, whatever. They all have their own different list.
Mm.
Allmax actually uses True Shield because True Shield has the most sophisticated WADA analyte list. They test for over 480. Informed Choice, I believe, is 280, and NSF, I believe, is 360. So that's why Allmax uses True Shield. The pricing is pretty comparable, but if you're going to test, you might as well test for all of them,
Mm.
right? Like that's what I never really understood with Informed Choice is if you're going to test for 260 or 280 of the 480 band, you might as well test for none of them. Like you test for all of them or none of them. It makes no sense to test for half of them. Like it's part of that though, in their defense, is that they just haven't updated their regulations. They test for all the main stuff, but
Mm.
as you know, doping every year they add stuff, right? Before it was just steroids and peptide, but now there's SARMs, there's peptides, there's GLP-1 agonists, right? So part of the problem is that Informed Choice kind of just said, here's our protocol, and they've maintained protocol, where NSF and True Shield are constantly adding to their protocol as, the WADA list grows.
Is there an extensive history of these banned substances being found in over-the-counter supplements? I mean, there's a few instances I know of and have heard of, but how prevalent is it or was it?
It's honestly not very prevalent. It's I think a lot of professional athletes who get caught use that
Mhm.
as an excuse, right? Because it's an
Hmm.
easy excuse. Oh, it was my protein or whatever. Mathematically, it doesn't really make sense because steroids are expensive. Like steroids cost more than protein. So why would you put steroids in your protein? Where I would see it happening more often is that typically there's two ways you can make supplements, right? The big companies own their own facilities, they own their own manufacturing. The smaller companies, they do co-packers. So they basically pay someone to manufacture their products for them. And there's nothing wrong with that, but the problem with that is that you're not their only customer. So what could happen is, especially if it's a smaller co-packing facility, they might bottle SARMs or peptides or whatever because they need the revenue, right? So what could happen is even though you're doing everything right, you're making creatine or whatever, they were just blending SARMs or peptides before you. It's still on the equipment and then it gets laced into your product. So that is one way it could happen. Again, it's probably not that likely because there are protocols of washing the equipment and things like that, but that is one risk of using a smaller company that they wouldn't have the money to have their own facility. They'd be using co-manufacturing partners. And again, in theory, there's nothing wrong with co-manufacturing partners, but because you're not their only customer, who knows what their other customers are? And if, especially if it's a smaller co-manufacturing plant and they need the money, they might say, hey, after hours, we'll capsulate some SARMs for you, or we'll press some whatever, right? So that is one area.
What about banned stimulants? Because again, some supplements have stimulants, and obviously that's changed over time with things like ephedrine being in old products that are no longer allowed. And I mentioned Jack 3D earlier. And hey, I going to the gym in my early mid 20s. I remember Jack 3D, 1MR were on the count over the counter. And I
Yeah.
remember these things being great, but turns out that like you could probably speak to this better than me, but effectively contained a precursor to meth.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it's one of those things is like if it's not banned, you can use it, right? And it's kind of one of those things is people will always kind of look for that gray area stuff until it eventually gets banned. And you can alter a molecule very, very minimal, and it's technically not the banned molecule. So I see that happen all the time. But it's one of those things where the smaller companies will do it because they're not as worried about it. The bigger companies, it's a lawsuit waiting to happen, right?
Mm.
If you can manipulate a molecule to make it very similar to crystal meth, even though it's not on the FDA ban list, you're asking for problems, right? Someone takes it, they get a heart attack, there's a lawsuit. So typically you don't see that in the bigger companies. Like you would never see Optimum Nutrition do a pre-workout with a bunch of like shady stuff in it, right? They just have too much to lose. The smaller companies, they're 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 a little bit less risk sensitive, I guess would be the word, because they don't have as much to lose. So it's one of those things, right? It's kind of it's and it, there's it's all about what you want as a customer too, right?
Mm.
Personally, I wouldn't recommend a product like that because it's doing, in my opinion, a lot more harm than good. You might feel amazing during your workout, but your sleep quality would be crap. It's putting a lot of strain on your adrenal glands. But, some people want that, right? And we just live in a society where customers kind of dictate the market, right?
And I think, just to qualify this, having Jack 3D as a pre-workout supplement, because that's what it was. I don't remember it being like a high or anything even remotely like that. Almost more like just seemed clear and focused. Whereas I found the 1MR, which apparently had the same thing in it, to be very like intense. I didn't like it at all. It was a very like high caffeine intake, I think, with it as well. So I found that one very unpleasant. I never liked it at all. And again, it
The
didn't seem like
problem
a
with
drug
those
to me.
formulas is those are prop blends. So you really don't know how much of what you are getting, right? And
Mm.
luckily the supplement market has kind of shifted away that. You don't really see as many prop blends anymore. But that was the even scarier thing is it had 10, 12, 13 stimulants in it. You didn't even know how much, right? Like you knew you were getting 4,000 or 6,000 milligrams of this proprietary blend, but you couldn't even monitor your caffeine dosage because you didn't even know how much caffeine was in there. So yeah, it's nice that the supplement industry has kind of stared away from that because especially with things like stimulants, it's actually kind of scary if you think about it, right? Like if you take too much protein, you might just get a little bit gassy and have an upset stomach. But if you take too much stimulants, you can actually have a heart attack, right? Like, yeah. You
And
can still legally do prop blends. It's just been kind of frowned upon because customers now are kind of complaining, like, I want to know what I'm putting in my body, right? Like, and really, if you're making good formulas, you wouldn't want a prop blend. You'd want to, disclose the ingredients and show the ingredients.
and someone might have heard this as a proprietary blend, but you make a really great point because I hadn't thought about it. I think a lot of the time a proprietary blend, they can kind of claim what's in there, but you don't know the dosage and they actually underdose it. So that way it's not really any sort of meaningful effect. But you also make the point that they could actually overdose. I mean, not the technical like, hey, die from an overdose, but have a really, really high dose of it.
Yeah.
And that could be a problem too.
Typically with prop blends, you're doing label dressing, right? So you'll
Mm.
max dose the cheap stuff and then you'll microdose the expensive stuff.
Mm.
But because you don't know how much of each, it seems like you're getting all that stuff in proper
Mm.
ratios. You're just not. That's the thing.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, nitrogen spiking's been a previous scandal in the industry, and I mean they're gone now. So I'm happy to call out Muscle Farm was this product, this both protein powders and other products. I don't know. I feel like they were around like almost 15 years ago, and they kind of came out of nowhere. I think they bought up a lot of the retail store space, so they were, had a lot of push. But then they were one of the brands that was pretty central
Yeah.
for this nitrogen spiking, controversy. What happened there?
So Actually, funny enough, like if you can see behind me, I have different protein quality measurement tests.
Mm,
So the difference between carbohydrates, fats, and proteins is proteins have nitrogen. So fats and carbohydrates are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. Protein is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. Now, how you generally test for protein is you test for the nitrogen content because the nitrogen is the only component that's in protein versus carbohydrates and
mhm.
fat. So if you have 100 grams of something and you test the nitrogen, you can test how much protein is in there. Now, the problem is that when you do a nitrogen test, you can't differentiate between what amino acids are making up that protein. So typically, what will happen is for a nitrogen spiking protein company, they'll spike the protein with a cheap unessential amino acid because it'll still show up as nitrogen in the test. So let's say the label said 30 grams of protein. You could put in 10 grams of whey protein and 20 grams of glycine or some cheap non-essential amino acid, but when you test the nitrogen, it would still show 30 grams of protein. Now, luckily, people have kind of caught on to that. So now a lot of people are looking for Diaz and PDCAS, which doesn't just measure protein, it also measures protein quality.
Mm.
Because then it would flag that as okay, this is pretty much all non-essential amino acids. The protein quality is very, very low. So a really good brand would not just have the protein on the label, they would also have the protein quality scores like PDCAS or Diaz. So that I think that kind of answers your question, but that's basically what they're doing is they're cutting the protein with a
Mm.
cheap amino acids. Most often it's glycine because it's a non-essential, really cheap amino acid. So when you measure protein, it still shows as protein, but most of it is this non-essential amino acid that's really not doing much for you. But your COA actually still shows the protein on the label. So that's how they get caught. Because then when you actually do like a biological value test or a PDCAS or a Diaz, and you test for the actual amino acid content, you can tell it doesn't have the amino acid content of the whey or milk or casein or whatever protein is on the label.
And I'm guessing this is a big exposed thing, so the reputable brands are not messing around with this shit anymore, if they ever did.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. I mean, there's always ways to cheat if you
Mm,
want to, but the big reputable brands, there's a couple reasons why they wouldn't do it. Is that number one, if you're cutting your protein with amino acid, the taste, the texture, the mixability, it's all going to be different, right? So customers aren't stupid. Even if they didn't know what protein spiking was, if they had a tub that they really liked and the next tub tasted different and mixed different, they would go
mm.
to the retailer and go, "Hey, like, what happened? Like this, I got a bad batch or something." And then number two, because these brands have such a big customer base, it would destroy their whole company, right? Like you're not going to buy that protein again once you read an independent lab report that they were cutting it with glycine or whatever non-essential amino acid. So it's kind of like what I was saying before is like the big companies, they have too much to lose. A smaller company that, is still building customer base and things like that, they don't really have as much to lose. So they probably would be more risk tolerant of things like that. But like you would never see an All Max or an Optimum Nutrition or someone who's got contracts with Walmart and major retailers. It just wouldn't be worth it because even though they might save some money on the manufacturing side, the customers they would lose, it just no one would do it. It's not worth the risk.
That totally makes sense. Now, we also occasionally will hear things about, this is recent stuff, about the quality of supplements that people are buying off of Amazon. So is that blanket? Because I sometimes order protein powder off of Amazon, right? Or is that, off brands? Are we talking almost exclusively about like things like herbs and medicinal stuff that honestly that has a really dubious reputation anyway? So yeah, what's sort of a good guideline if someone's ordering their protein, let's say off Amazon?
So it's kind of like what I was saying before, like an Amazon brand with not a bunch of customer base, they can cheat. They don't really care because,
Mm.
they're not losing contracts at Walmart or things like that. The other thing that typically happens, especially in the herbal space, is that a herb has an active component. Let's just use coffee, for example, right?
Mm.
You're buying coffee, but it's really the caffeine that is the active component, right? So what typically happens is they'll take coffee, they'll standardize it for 20, 30% caffeine, sell it to a company who's doing things right. And then the raw coffee beans that are left over that has the caffeine extracted out, they'll then sell it to someone else and they'll put it in a supplement and sell it as coffee, but the active component has already been extracted. So you typically see that in like ashwagandha or, like all these herbal extracts where there's an active component like the withanolides. They'll pull the withanolides out, sell that to a premium, and then the crude herb where there's nothing else, nothing really left in it, they'll sell it at a cheap price to someone else, and then they'll, capsulate it and sell it on Amazon. And the really crappy thing is they're labeling it as ashwagandha. Technically, they are selling you ashwagandha. All the beneficial aspects of it has just been pulled out, right? So that's another thing with like the unreputable brands is they're going to be looking for the cheapest inputs possible. They'll buy inputs that have been stripped of the active component, knowing that's not really going to do anything, but for them it's just a dollars and cents play, right? Because then they'll, make a really cheap product, spend all these money on Amazon ads and still make a lot of money, even though they're spending all these money on ads to try to bait and switch customers, right? So that's typically what you see. It happens a lot in the herbal space. It also happens a lot, unfortunately, in the vitamin space because
Mm,
they'll be using like really low quality, low absorption forms of minerals. So
okay.
magnesium, for example, there's multiple different forms of magnesium. Magnesium bisglycinate and magnesium citrate are generally the best two. Magnesium bisglycinate, I'd say, is the best overall magnesium. Magnesium citrate's a little bit better for like muscle cramping, but they're both chelated, highly absorbable forms of magnesium. Magnesium oxide, in comparison, is only 2% absorbable. So same thing is they'll use a cheap form of magnesium. They'll sell magnesium and they're legitimately selling you magnesium, but the customer doesn't know that's only a 2% absorbable form of magnesium. Even though they look at the bottle, oh wow, 100 pills of magnesium, $10, this is great. It's $10 that's pretty much useless. You're not really absorbing it. So that's another thing is especially for like the uneducated customers, these kind of cockroach brands, whatever you want to call
Mm,
them, they'll purposely use cheaper, inferior ingredients, knowing that the customer doesn't really know what they're looking for. And
fair.
unfortunately, you see that a lot on Amazon, Walmart, just because generally those are uneducated customers, right?
Mm.
Usually a more educated customer is going into like a Popeyes or Supplement King or Supplement World because they want to talk to someone. So it's unfortunately, that's just the part of being on like an Amazon marketplace. You're typically looking for people who are scrolling in the middle of the night. Hey, I just watched a Dr. Oz episode of magnesium. I'm probably low in magnesium. I should buy one. Oh wow, this one's only $10. Buy it. They don't really know what they're looking for, and then the Amazon merchant is purposely trying to, kind of clickbait a customer like that.
This episode is brought to you by Just Bite Me Meals. I work long days and I won't compromise my client experience or sacrifice my workout, sleep, or nutrition. So I needed a quality and reliable meal prep service so I could save time on cooking and shopping and have more time for the stuff that matters. Net out the cost of groceries and the service isn't as much as you might think, and regular impulsive food delivery apps eating out that cost way more anyway. I get more meal variety and less dishes to clean, and I've been referring clients to Just Bite Me Meals for a long time, and I recently started ordering myself. Food is great. The beef brisket tacos are my favorite so far, and there's a lot of menu choice. Your calories and macros are listed. The portions are great. You can order custom meals. They deliver to your door, or you can pick up from their storefront. And I'm sorry to listeners outside of Alberta, but Just Bite Me Meals is currently just in Edmonton, Calgary, Grand Prairie, and Fort McMurray. Ordering from Just Bite Me Meals made my life easier instantly. And you can get 10% off on all your orders using my code, Andrew Coates Fitness, all caps, on their website. That's Andrew Coates Fitness, all capitals, or go to the link and the code in the show notes.
Do we ever see counterfeiting of supplements? And I suppose that could show up in a couple of ways where, like we just talked about, someone is saying something's in the product that's not, or the counterfeiting of a specific brand. Is there any fear for dealing with that?
Overseas, a lot. Not so much in North America, but overseas, huge,
Hmm.
huge, huge.
Wow.
Because if you think about overseas, right, if you're importing a Canadian or an American brand, it's huge money, right? So what they'll do is they'll make fake products in that country and then just copy the label. Most trademarks and patents are country specific too, so it's hard to even go after them because they're in a different continent. So yeah, it's not so much of a concern in North America, but yeah, if you're overseas, especially if you're in like the Middle East or things like that, there's a lot of counterfeit products.
Got it.
It's
Okay,
crazy
that's a lot.
actually that they would fake protein and stuff like that, but it happens.
So in these cases, are these like just there's simply no protein in there? It's lower quality, it's some inert substance, or are there actually potentially harmful things in these knockoffs?
Usually what they'll do is it'll be just like a 10% protein, 90% carb blend. Like they don't
Mm,
actually want to make people sick, right? Because, they want them to keep buying the fake stuff.
mm.
But it'll basically just be like a very, very low quality knockoff type of thing. It's kind of like if you go to like Asia or the Middle East, you can buy like fake Louis Vuitton purses and things like
Mm.
that, right? It's kind of the same thing as like you'll buy this purse and you go, oh, this is great. In 2 weeks, the strap falls off, the zipper breaks. Like it's just garbage, basically, right?
Sometimes, and this is completely a side quest, but sometimes it's the same factory making the same thing for a fraction of the cost at the same quality. It's just so that actually goes on too in the luxury goods market as well. But
It
I
does.
don't think I don't think we're seeing that with protein.
Just because the margins aren't there. Like in the luxury goods, you're typically dealing with 10,000 to 15,000% margins. In protein, you're getting 30% if you're lucky. Just because the cost of the inputs are so high, the cost of shipping is high. Like what people don't realize is like when you're buying a tub of protein at like a Popeyes or like a Supplement King, that Popeyes is making like maybe $10 and the brand is making like maybe $10. Like there's very, very little profitability going on just because the cost of the protein is so expensive. Because if you think of a cup of milk as 8 grams of protein, think about how much milk you would need to have to make that tub of protein. Then you got to flavor it, then you got to instantize it. Like there's very, very little money in the protein space. Same
Mm.
thing with protein bars. There's very, very little money in protein bars because just the cost of ingredients is so high.
Hmm. Let's do omega 3s. So I saw something recently, and I've seen this waved around a few times about a lot of omega 3 supplements when you're purchasing them, they can oxidize, which effectively makes them rancid. I would love for you to explain exactly what's going on there and how much of an issue this is. And then if someone wants to get, because I think omega 3 is one of the more proven supplements that has benefit. I would love to hear you say that. You
Yeah.
can give it the entire treatment. But so I think we can safely recommend, hey, a lot of people would benefit from this. Please share the conditions where and where would you buy? Where would you go? And maybe the storage as well.
So I'd say, if you ask me the most important supplement for people, most likely I'd probably say omega-3.
Hmm.
The reason for that is in terms of essential macronutrients, there's protein, essential amino acids, and there's also essential fats. Most people are getting not enough protein, but some protein. Most people aren't getting any omega-3s in their diet,
Hmm.
especially here in North America. Like we just don't eat a lot of fish. It's just not something that's widely consumed. Now, when it comes to fat, there's three types of fat. There's saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, and polyunsaturated fat. So saturated fat is all double bonds, and that's what makes the fat very, very stiff and rigid. And that's why you probably don't want to eat a whole ton of it because it's very stiff and it doesn't kind of flow through your body nicely. This is all just kind of very like layman's terms, right? Monounsaturated fat has one link that's a single bond. So it's all saturated bonds except for one link that's a single bond. Because of that, it's a much more fluid fat and has a lot more health benefits. The last one is the polyunsaturated fat that has multiple single bonds, hence poly, the word meaning multiple. And within there, you have omega-6, omega-3, omega-9s. Generally speaking, polyunsaturated have the most health benefits, followed by monounsaturated, followed by saturated. The problem with polyunsaturated is because they have so many single bonds, it's a very delicate fat. It's very, very fluid, it's very liquid. It's good for your body because it's going to provide a lot of health benefits. It's going to be able to flow throughout the body very nicely. The problem with that is a very delicate fat that oxidizes easily. Oxidize basically means goes bad, goes rancid, becomes toxic. So there's two things that can oxidize a fat. Number one is heat, and the second is light. So the problem with fish oil is that if you keep it in a clear jar, or you keep it in a spot that's exposed to sunlight and there's a lot of sunlight penetrating through it, it's going to oxidize very, very easily. Now, that doesn't mean fish oil is bad. It just means you want to look for a dark container and you ideally want to keep it in the fridge. It's kind of like, it's kind of like salmon, right? Salmon will go bad much faster than chicken or steak, right? Just because salmon, very high in polyunsaturated fats, chicken doesn't really have a lot of fat, steak has a lot of saturated fat. And you can even just test it. If you put salmon, chicken, and steak on your island and just let it sit, the salmon would probably go bad in like a day. The chicken would probably take like 3 to 4 days, and the steak would probably take like a week. So you can, I'm not saying do this, but you can actually see the chemistry in real life kind of work. And that's why fish oil is such a great fat for you health wise, but it's a very delicate fat that you ideally want to keep in the fridge. And you for sure want to look for a container that has a black or a dark color to keep the sunlight out. If you see a fish oil that has a clear, like a clear bottle, you wouldn't want to buy that because by the time you're getting it, it's probably oxidized just by the amount of light that's been penetrating and hitting the fat. It's probably oxidized the fat.
Okay. I know I'm going to give a shout, and I don't have a supplement sponsor. I may actually pursue that someday. I mean, I think there's nuance, but there are things that I think are really great. But I'm going to give Momentous a shout out there. They have a really good omega-3 in a darker bottle. So that's just one of the ones that comes to mind. Um, any other practical wisdom for people on that one?
No, I was just gonna say like if you have a brand like Momentous or whatever, and they're selling fish oil in a black bottle or a dark bottle, chances are that's a brand that knows what they're doing, and that's a good brand.
Hmm.
If you're buying if you're looking at fish oil and it's in a clear bottle, I'd be very worried of that brand because if they don't know that, what else don't they know? So, not that that's the litmus test, but little things like that kind of pick up what brand is, really like doing their checks and balances on things and not just the product itself, but also the packaging. Another thing to look out for is if there's, if, and I've seen the craziest amount of like spelling mistakes and things like that on a label. That just goes to show you there's no quality checks if they're printing labels that are full of spelling mistakes and things like that. Another thing, like, as a customer, you should be thinking if they're not even proofreading their labels, what else is getting missed and lost, right? And I'm sure you've seen it too, like multiple spelling mistakes on a label.
Uh, if someone is taking omega-3 and it's oxidized, will they be able to tell when they consume it? Will it make them sick? Will it taste funny?
Yeah, it's actually very, very easy to test. So if the fish oil is a capsule, just cut it in half and smell it. If it has no smell to it, it's good. If it smells like rotten fish, it's oxidized, throw it out. It's really
Okay.
that simple. Like you could obviously do chemical analytical testing, but the easiest way is just take one
Hmm.
capsule, cut it in half. It shouldn't smell like anything. Just like fresh fish from the monger, it doesn't really smell like anything, right? And any good fishmonger will tell you if the fish stinks like fish, it's bad. It's gone bad. Don't eat it. And same thing here. If like you cut it and it really reeks, don't consume it. It's oxidized. That's the easiest way to test it.
Okay. So we've got over omega-3. Are there any other supplements? I mean, yeah, we can definitely give protein and creatine a surface level treatment. I think we're pretty confident those are really safe. And again, a shout to Olmax. For years, I've been asked, what brand of creatine to buy, and I've been consuming Allmax creatine for a very long time. Creatine monohydrate, extremely reputable brand. I'm comfortable saying that. I think most people would benefit from consuming creatine. And again, I only endorse monohydrate. I don't think any of the other formulations really have any value. So, what else would you say to people? This is something, because again, I think there's people who have very negative reactions to supplements broadly. They're just like, supplements bad, blah, blah, blah. And then there are people who you can kind of tell it's like anything unproven, hook it to my veins, I will inject it.
Yeah.
And then there's the middle ground where it's like, okay, here's the evidence, here's the stuff here's how it works. A good example again with creatine, we are hearing lots of positive potential things about the brain health benefits, but they're definitely overblown. I've had other guests coming on talking about the stuff. They're promising. I don't think there's really any downside outside of like just consuming a mountain of it and having some GI distress. But what else would you say to people? This is safe. This is proven. This is worth having. You mentioned magnesium earlier as well.
Yeah, so Supplements are just that. They supplement your diet, right? So you really kind of got to put on your detective's hat and be honest about your diet and say what's missing. Am I not eating enough protein? Am I not consuming enough fatty fish, omega-3s? Am I not consuming enough greens, fruits and vegetables? Am I not consuming enough fiber? Most people in North America don't consume enough fatty fish, so omega-3 would be a great supplementation. If your demographic was Asia, probably wouldn't have that recommendation because they consume a lot more fish there, right? Greens, especially, like a good quality all around green supplement that also has fiber, I think that would be a great recommendation. Less than 15% of North Americans consume the recommended of fruits and vegetables per day. Again, that's not everyone. There could be someone listening to your podcast who's, very regimented about making homemade greens juices and having fruit at lunch and lots of vegetables at dinner. Great to them. I know myself personally, I could definitely eat more fruits and vegetables. It's just a convenience thing. Like it's just I'd say it's probably the most effort in terms of like washing, prepping, cooking, things like that.
Okay.
Protein, another thing. Protein isn't generally convenient, not in North America. It's very easy to grab and go carbs. It's harder to grab and go protein. So, a protein supplement for most people would help maybe not every day, but the days where you're busier, you haven't had enough time to cook and things like that, it can kind of help hit the shortfalls. Fiber, if it's not in your green supplement, would be another one. Magnesium, part of that one is the soil level of minerals are getting depleted. So,
Mm,
most people are deficient in magnesium. Those would be the main ones. And then, of course, for Canadians, vitamin D.
mm,
Vitamin D, actually, funny enough, is not a vitamin, it's a steroid. They called it a vitamin purposely because they didn't want, people to be like, I don't want to take steroids. But vitamin D is actually a steroid. It's a hormone. That's why your body can manufacture it. Humans cannot manufacture vitamins and minerals. So vitamin D is actually a steroid. And it's super, super important in a myriad of biological functions. It helps with calcification of the bones. It helps with so many things. So for Canadians, maybe not year round, but especially during the winter months, everyone should be taking a vitamin D supplement.
and the actual melanin, the color in your skin, and Canada, very diverse place. So there's a lot of people from Africa, South Asia, whether historically or recently. And so if you have darker skin tone, it's actually even harder to synthesize this stuff. So it actually matters even more. And I would
Yeah.
also, I can't remember, I wish I could remember who I had on. I think Dr. Alan Bacon, we talked about it, might have been other guests as well. But even in the northern states, and yeah, I wish I could remember, but I know it's popped up before. But I know it was something to do with nutrition and performance, where athletes who were playing sports primarily in northern states, who were African American, very high rates of vitamin D deficiency.
Yeah, it's very, very popular. I'd say most Canadians are deficient in vitamin D and don't even realize it.
Mm,
And the craziest thing about vitamin D is it's pennies. There's really no excuse. Like especially if you go to like Costco, you can buy 720
mm.
pills for like $10. Like it's so inexpensive. But yeah, especially during the winter months, it's super, super important for Canadians. The one thing about vitamin D is because it's fat soluble, you'd want to take it with meals, particularly
Okay.
meals that contain fat. So that's as you're quickly learning with
Mm,
nutrition, there's so many nuances. So
mm.
you could be taking a vitamin D supplement thinking you're doing all this benefit, but if you're taking it on an empty stomach, it's probably not even getting absorbed, right? So there's so many nuances with nutrition. I wish nutrition was taught more in school, personally, but yeah,
As do we all in the industry. That would go a long way.
yeah,
Okay. So obviously you work for a popular, reputable company. What goes into your decision-making matrix when you are considering formulating and marketing? Because I'm sure you being, for lack of a better word, the chemist in this, you know, there are other people in the organization, on the marketing side, product development side that are there are competing goals. I'm sure there's like, hey, there's for profit, et cetera, but you guys also want to maintain your reputation and provide excellent products. So are there products, you may not be able to talk about this explicitly, that you guys turned around and said, no, we just don't believe the evidence supports us actually marketing something in this category? Yeah, what goes into your decision making?
yeah. Actually, terkesterone was one. Everyone was jumping on terkesterone. There's pretty much zero science that actually works. So yeah, we carbosh that. Um, there's kind of like the flow of events is our sales guys will kind of say, "Hey, Trev, we've got a lot of retailers or customers asking for this. Let's look into it." Right? And then I'll look into it and see, is this even something we'd want to pursue? Is the science there? Turkesterone, for example, there was one study and it was a multi-ingredient supplement containing turkesterone. So there's never actually been a study on turkesterone showing it works. All of that is just social media
Mm,
pro science. Now, I will say, just because the science doesn't exist doesn't mean the science isn't there. It just hasn't been studied. So ancestral evidence is considered the lowest form of evidence because there's no control. Turkesterone maybe actually works based on all this ancestral evidence, but for me to actually jump on the bandwagon, I'd want to see some actual like properly done studies on it to make sure that this isn't just a placebo effect or people trying to sell a supplement and then hyping it up to try to make sales, right? So I will say that is like in turkesterone's defense, there's been no studies, so there's been no study showing it doesn't work, but there's also been no study showing that it works. But if you've only got $100 to spend, there's so many ingredients that have been studied dozens, hundreds, even thousands of times showing it works. So why wouldn't you want to prioritize the stuff that has research backing it? So that's kind of just a side note. So usually it starts with the sales guys. Hey, we've got a lot of customers or retailers, people asking for this. I'll look into the science, look into, does this work? What dosages work? Then I'll start working on some like costing and see like, is this even a viable product to make? And then we'll kind of work on flavoring and things like that, and then we'll launch it. The
mm,
biggest delay in product launches is actually the Health Canada approval. Like I
mm,
said, it's about 12 months. And until you finalize your flavors, your formula, everything, you can't even submit. So that's the biggest pain in the butt, honestly, is the Health Canada approval. But most stuff that's trading in the marketplace, there's a reason for it. Like collagen, for example, everyone's talking about collagen right now. And you'll hear that collagen doesn't stimulate mTOR, mammalian rapid. And that's true. It doesn't help with muscle protein synthesis, but the main protein in your body isn't muscle, it's collagen, right? So it's kind of like a very short-sighted way of looking at collagen and saying like, well, collagen sucks because it doesn't help with muscle building. Well, it's not intended to help with muscle building. It's intended to help with joints, tendons, ligaments, hair, bone, teeth, nails. So that's the one thing I've never really understood is like
mm.
someone saying collagen doesn't help with muscle building. Well, duh, it's not supposed to. That's like saying chicken breast sucks because it doesn't have omega 3s. Well, it has no fat in it. It's not supposed to have omega 3s, right? So yeah, that was just a side note. But
But it's a really good one. Is there evidence to support that collagen has other benefits? Because you're right,
completely,
a
yeah.
lot of the industry, and I would say the evidence-based industry, tends to be very negative about collagen.
So it's unfortunate with social media, everyone's trying to be the smartest person in the room
Mm,
because controversy sells, right? So all it takes is for me to make a post saying, here's the amino acid profile of collagen. It's super low in essential amino acids. Here's the amino acid profile of whey protein. It's super high in essential amino acids. Stop wasting your money on collagen. Whey protein has more essential amino acids in it. Then people will, comment, oh my goodness, I've been buying collagen. Right? But it's not supposed to be high in essential amino acids. It's supposed to be high in the non-essential amino acids your body uses to make collagen, right? So that's the unfortunate thing about social media is there's a lot of misinformation that gets shared. Now, would you want to use collagen to hit your daily protein targets? No, you wouldn't really want to consider it a protein supplement. You kind of want to consider it more of like a joint beauty overall health supplement is kind of the way you'd want to view it. But yeah, there's a lot of evidence to show that collagen helps with skin elasticity, helps with joint health, tendon health, ligament
mm,
health, especially in the beauty space, there's a ton of studies that have showed that collagen helps hair health, teeth
mm,
health, skin health. Yeah, completely. Because it makes sense, right? Like your hair, teeth, skin, nails, it's all made of endothelial collagen. So giving your body what it needs to repair and grow skin would give you better skin, right? It's kind of like
mm.
taking essential amino acids, which muscle is made of, would help your muscles grow faster, right? Like it's really the same thing. Like I don't know why people are so confused or hung up on it.
Is it more effect for these things than glucosamine chondroitin, which is something that was, there's a lot of claims and you get a lot of anecdotes about people saying, hey, my joints felt better when I took it.
Glucosamine and chondroitin are actually collagen derivatives, believe it or not.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. It's like HMB is a leucine derivative.
Okay.
So you can make the argument that glucosamine and chondroitin are more bioavailable forms of collagen, or more specific forms of collagen that help more with joint and tendons specifically, where collagen is kind of like a master of all type of thing. Like it'll help with everything. So for most people, I'd say a collagen supplement is all you need because you're gonna get a little bit of everything. But if you don't care about skin, you don't care about teeth, you don't care about nails, you only care about joints,
Mm.
glucosamine would be a more targeted form of action.
Okay.
Kind of like HMB.
Mm.
HMB is really good for muscle preservation. So if you're really scared about losing muscle, you're about to have a surgery or you're going to be sedentary, HMB is probably your best bet.
Mm.
If you care just about muscle growth and repair and everything as a whole, you'd want essential amino acids. So the more synthesized the molecule is, the more specific its actions, which can be very good if you're looking for a very specific thing. But most people kind of want the more broad aspect
Mm.
because it covers kind of everything, unless there's a specific ailment or injury or something you're trying to do. But that's more, professional athletes or medical
Mm.
conditions or things like that.
Let's finish here. Are there any supplements that, if someone is involved in fairly high level athletics, that you say, hey, yes, this has benefits? And I think of beta alanine perhaps as an example, but I'll let you kind of go through it. It might not be something that the everyday fitness enthusiast, the person who's considered about their health, longevity, putting on a bit of muscle, might be majoring in the minor if they mess with it. But for an athlete, it's like, hey, this probably will give you an edge.
Salt.
Hmm.
Yeah. What a lot of people don't realize is caffeine actually leaches electrolytes from your body. So most athletes use caffeine. Most athletes sweat a lot, so you're at a double loss of electrolytes,
Hmm.
primarily sodium. Salt is one of the most important things athletes can supplement with. Unfortunately, salt still has the connotation of it being bad. I don't. And again, like for a sedentary person who's not sweating, you don't need a lot of salt. But for an athlete who's sweating, you need a lot of salt. Salt is extremely beneficial, and one of the most overlooked things. I've helped so many people who are saying like, I'm crashing mid-workout, I'm getting cramps, like add some salt to your water. Did wonders. And they were, using carb powders and carb gels and everything. And I'm like, your nutrition's fine. What you need is more electrolytes, you need more salt.
What about ratio of things like salt, sodium, potassium, and again, magnesium is also an electrolyte.
You know what? Like generally you want the most sodium, you want the second most potassium, and you want the third amount of magnesium. You actually don't need a supplement with calcium because the body recycles calcium, and over calcium supplementation can cause calcification of the arteries.
Okay.
But as long as you're, supplementing right, you don't have to worry so much about ratios. Typically you only really see like ratio problems when someone's like crazy dosing stuff.
Mm.
And that's, like they're eating like 50 gummies in one sitting or something like that. And it's usually kids where that type of stuff happens. It's pretty hard to overdose on stuff because sodium, potassium, magnesium, they're all water soluble, right? Your body just flushes out the excess. The things that you have to be a little bit more concerned are the fat soluble nutrients like vitamin A, E, D, and K. But even then, like you would really, really have to make an effort. Generally, you only see it in children. And what happens is they see mommy and daddy taking a multivitamin, so they want to be like mommy and daddy, and they take the whole bottle. And like that amount of fat soluble vitamins for a child, could lead to toxicity. But very, very seldom does that happen. Like a much bigger concern would be too much caffeine, things like that. Like really to try to overdo it on electrolytes or vitamins and minerals would be pretty tough. The overconsumption of caffeine is a huge problem, but that's a whole different topic.
I suppose we got a little wiggle room for that too, because I think in Canada, here I am enjoying my white monster, which I have on
Yeah.
most episodes. And I think the broadly recommended, daily recommended dose, I think limit is 400 milligrams. So usually these things have a built-in buffer. I think certainly they do with aspartame. So, and I know that we also can develop we develop tolerances to it. So this is highly individualized. It would also be relative to body mass, I presume,
Yeah.
certainly is with alcohol. So any just general thoughts on how to, say to someone, hey, just don't go past this point. Any heuristics?
So the problem with caffeine is it's kind of like that Spider-Man saying with great power becomes great responsibility. Caffeine is, I believe it's the most studied drug in the world. If not, it's one of the most studied drugs in the world. And there's pretty much undeniable evidence that caffeine works. The problem with it is it's very habit forming and your body builds up a tolerance very, very quick. So the 100 milligrams that used to work, now you need 200, now you need 300, now you need 400. And now you're at that 400 milligram dosage that's doing the same efficacy that 100 milligrams used. So basically, how caffeine works is adenosine is a neurotransmitter in the brain that makes you feel tired and sleepy and relaxed. So caffeine blocks the adenosine receptor, so it doesn't actually make you feel more energized, it makes you feel less tired.
Mm.
So it makes you feel less tired, less foggy, less sleepy, and then in turn you feel more alert and more energized and more focused and all those good things. The problem though is the brain is so smart that it realizes, hey, these adenosine receptors are getting blocked. Let's create more adenosine receptors. And that's how the dosage no longer has the same effect because now your body made more adenosine receptors. And then you block those with the higher dosage of caffeine. And then the body just keeps making more, keeps making more. And then you're getting into this really bad situation where it's kind of like robbing Peter to pay Paul, where your body's constantly making more and more adenosine receptors because it's noticing that the adenosine receptors are getting blocked by the more and more caffeine you're consuming. The only way to prevent it is caffeine breaks. The latest study I read, and again, this is very, very individual. It would depend on how long you've been consuming caffeine, your body weight, things like that. 8 days of caffeine abstinence to reset the adenosine receptors. So it's actually not that long. The body heals pretty quick. So the best thing I would recommend for athletes, and this is kind of a do as I say, not as I do, because I definitely need to take a caffeine break. But if you go 8 days without caffeine, and I'm talking zero caffeine, I'm talking
Mm.
no coffee, no black tea, nothing. On day 9, if you consume a small cup of coffee, and I'm talking like not even like a McDonald's small, like an actual small cup of coffee, you're wired. You're on a different planet. And it really goes to show you how desensitized you become to caffeine.
Mm.
So caffeine, I'm all for caffeine. I am not an anti-caffeine person or anything. I believe I use caffeine, but it is one of those things that if you cycle it, you'll get the maximum efficacy from it. And especially if, you're going on a vacation or especially going to like Mexico, it's an all-inclusive resort, you're just gonna be laying on the beach, sleeping, doing nothing. That would be the time to do it. And then when you're back and you take that caffeine, your brain function, your workout performance, like everything will be to a completely different level. So if you're very smart with your programming and it's, an off season or a deload or whatever, that would be the time to take a caffeine break. And because it's one of those things like you can't outsmart the body.
Mm.
Like the laws of the body are going to always outsmart you. You can't just keep taking more and more caffeine because the body's smart in that. It's just going to keep making more and more adenosine receptors.
What if, and I say this in jest, what if the goal is to be able to just continuously drink more white monsters because you enjoy them? Don't
You
answer
could,
that.
yeah, you could. I mean, I wouldn't recommend that because still your liver has to filter out the caffeine. But yeah, you theoretically could.
This has been absolutely fantastic. I really appreciate it, especially from somebody who's, working right in the middle of the industry. Everybody can find you on Instagram at Trevor Kouritzin, Kouritzin. And is there anything else you want to point people to? I know you got a blog where you write articles as well.
Yeah, drtrev.com.
Beautiful. I
I
appreciate
got to
this.
start writing more blogs. I've just been busy.
Yeah, well, you're doing good stuff. I appreciate you coming on. Thank you.
Yeah. Talk to you later, Andrew. Talk to you later.